I was in music class. I was 11 years old, and the principal of the school came in the room and had tears running down her cheek, actually not just in her eyes, and she told us that she had very bad news for us, that President Kennedy had been assassinated.
Yes, I remember I was in Miss Thatcher's English class when Mr. Dickerson walked in the room, our math teacher, and said the president has been shot. He then came in 2 hours later and said the president is dead.
The kids I was around were pretty upset because we knew it was really important, but I'm not sure how many of us really understood what a significant event it was, because we were
all totally shocked. We really were, for farm kids, it was one of those things that we just didn't think that and didn't understand how. And of course they closed school down.
Early on, I remember going to the local basketball court and just shooting hoops and reflecting on what that would mean to be sent to war in a faraway land for an issue that none of us seemed to understand.
It was realistic from the beginning for me because I had a lot of friends who went. It was always on the tongue of all of us males that were in that age group because we were all carrying draft cards. We all knew at any time we could essentially be called up. I went through 2 draft times, one with the draft board and then the second with the lottery. And the draft board and lottery allowed me to finish college. They allowed me to go to college, but they wouldn't let me go anything beyond that before I was drafted.
Didn't get called. Quite a few of my buddies were called and served.
But it was, I remember every night, television, there was always a count, dead Vietnamese and dead Americans.
I was one of those teenagers raised on the nightly news showing scenes from the Vietnam War.
And the news reports were extremely graphic. And it was a depressing time, to be honest.
We had never seen anything like that before. So it was, it changed how our society viewed those things.
But Americans grew very callous, and it almost became like it wasn't real. It almost was like it was simply, the news was fiction. I think people just had the idea, they just lived in their own little world.
Yeah, I think war has become too close to video games. People forget those are human beings bleeding and dying. We've become too used to it, and that's unfortunate. The death of every person matters.
Yeah, my college, they burned a building at my college. We had to shut down Colorado State University for a week because of the protests being so wild. A group of students took over our ROTC building and held it for, it was about 10 days. We had the smell of tear gas in the air most every day I went to class. There was a strike called by the Students for a Democratic Society, the SDS, that was trying to get students not to go to class. So we had students walking through picket lines and daring anyone to stop them, and then you had those students trying to stop.
I marched in Miami, and when I visited Berkeley, California in the early 70s, I participated in peace marches there. And in the 72 Democratic Convention was in Miami, and I participated in some protest marches there. It I was hit by a fire hose during one of the peaceful protests. And yeah, I was active, in a small way I was active in the peace movement, the protest movement. It was really important to me to separate the soldiers from the politics. Like, I wasn't one of those guys screaming baby killers at our returning soldiers. Those were my buddies. I knew they were good people who were doing what they were supposed to be doing. I never vilified the individual soldiers. For me, it was political protest, not protest against the human beings who were young and just being sent over to do a dirty job. So I tried to keep the politics separate from the personal. Yeah, that was kind of a way of life in the late 60s and early 70s. People out on the streets letting anyone who would pass by know how they felt about things. And most of it peaceful. I was never around a violent protest. The media made a big deal about the ones that did go violent, but other than being hit by a water hose and having the police in Berkeley kind of march towards the protesters, I didn't see. There was no clubbing of people and no striking of police officers. It almost looked like a dance in which the police moved forward, the protesters fell back, the police moved back, the protesters moved forward, and nobody was really hurting anybody.
One protest that ultimately did was Kent State. That was the one that I think really caught the eye of Americans and said, we have to do something because it's tearing our nation apart. And that's when attitudes started changing. A lot of them talking about the protests of the time, a lot of lyrics that were very meaningful to young people.
Yeah, music practically defined my life back then. From the so-called British invasion in the mid-60s, the Beatles and the Dave Clark Five and all the Brit bands, the Kinks, the Rolling Stones, and then the American protest bands like the Jefferson Airplane. Music was part of the whole time. It wasn't really a soundtrack to it. It emerged from it. It was very organically part of that time period.
I don't know that it made any impact. I do know that it made, I think I felt very proud that my country would allow people to vote who were having to fight in our services. So I was really proud that we did that.
I was real happy to see that take place, and it helped return me and a lot of people to mainstream politics. And I cast my first presidential ballot in 1976. Well, I would define the new culture as understanding that every individual can make a difference in this country. And to me, that was very empowering and very enabling. And the fact that that idea was lost pretty quickly was disappointing. And for the last 30 years, I've seen mostly young people who just say, well, that's just the way it is. And now in the 20-teens, we're starting to see a little bit of the movement towards taking some control over our lives back.